This episode was brought to you by Google Cloud, a partner that needs no introduction. What you might not have heard of, though, is that Google offers a Google for Startups cloud program where they give you access to startup experts, technical training, business support, and cover your Google Cloud costs up to $200,000 for 2 years, or even $350,000 if you're an AI startup. Scale your startup faster and smarter with Google Cloud. Head over to goo.gle/Swisspreneur.
In the recycling world, there's like clean plastic, which is the stuff that we're used to recycling. So it's like the bottles, maybe some trays. In some cases, you can do like 100% polyester. It's the very clean, easy to segregate sort of plastic. So this can all be recycled with mechanical recycling, and it's done quite well. But everything outside the carpets, drapes, dirty stuff, the stuff mechanical recyclers reject because it was a clean bottle, but then you put paint in it so that your kids could finger paint, right? This all gets rejected and ends up either in landfill or incineration centers.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. If you enjoy listening to our show, make sure to follow the podcast and leave a rating. And now, here's your host, Sylvan.
Sam, very well welcome to the Swisspreneur Show. It's a pleasure to have you as a guest today.
Pleasure to be here as well. Super excited for this.
You're the co-founder and CEO at DePoly, a clean tech startup recycling hard to recycle plastic. Before we talk about your company, I want to travel back a bit in time. You're originally from Canada and you first moved to Switzerland to do your PhD at EPFL in Lausanne. So what actually made you choose EPFL and move to Switzerland?
So I was doing my degree in chemistry at the time, and I was originally doing organic chemistry, and I decided that I wanted to switch into something that had different job opportunities. So I was looking for, something that I could use my background into a new area. And I got lucky enough to find a professor who was moving from the US into Switzerland. And he needed an organic chemist, but was looking for somebody who could also do materials chemistry. I was lucky enough to find him, got the job, and we're based on the Sion campus. So it's École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, but it's the Sion campus, not the Lausanne campus. So I've been traveling between the two cities every day.
Fantastic. And, although Canada and Switzerland have the same colors in their flags, I assume there are quite some cultural differences. So did you experience any culture shock moments when you first moved to Switzerland?
So actually, I was interestingly enough, I was having this conversation with somebody, and there was a report that came out that said Switzerland and Canada are actually quite close to each other. So there wasn't a massive cultural shock when I first moved here. But in Canada, we're very used to like 24/7 grocery stores, restaurants being open super late, things like this. And so it was a little bit of a shock when all of a sudden I had to make sure I did my groceries by 6:30. And I had to really reorganize my day, but it wasn't too hard to adjust to.
And suddenly everything or almost everything is closed on a Sunday. That's also new to you, I guess.
Exactly, because usually Sundays you do grocery shopping, but now you can't do that, so you have to do it Saturday.
Exactly. So after you then finished your PhD in metal organic frameworks, you basically went straight to founding DePoly. Where did this entrepreneurial drive come from? Was it always your goal to have your own company eventually?
I don't know if the goal was never a company as my own, but I definitely wanted to get into industry. I had already decided that I was going to leave academia. And even during my interview, I had at EPFL, I had said that if there was a startup that spun out, that I would be interested in joining. So I kind of already had a little bit of that into my mentality. We knew a couple people here before I had moved over, and a lot of them were also in the startup scene. So I think I had more exposure to that when I came to Switzerland, and that also helped drive the decision in that direction.
Fantastic. And you then started your company in 2019. You were a total of 3 co-founders. Where did you meet your 2 co-founders, Bardi and Christopher?
So we actually met in the lab. When I moved in 2015, Chris started shortly after as the postdoc who was running the lab. And then Bardia joined, I think, at the very start of 2016. So we lived and breathed and worked in academia for, I think, almost 3 years. And then the company started, and then we spun it out. So all met in the lab, had a great academic experience, and then went directly into a startup with them.
Amazing. I guess that's a great starting point, right? You learn how to work together in the lab. You sort of have a bit of history together, and then okay, with these folks, I can also start a company with.
Yeah, exactly. You know what they're like during projects. You see when they're frustrated because PhDs are not a walk in the park, and then you get to know each other quite well. So it's really easy then to communicate and yeah.
Absolutely. And how do you split the responsibilities? Because you all sort of have the lab background, so to speak, but of course you also need different skill sets, right? To do financial analytics, to do sales, etc. How do you sort of split the responsibilities with quite a similar background with the three of you?
For us, it was kind of easy. So Bardia is an engineer. So he went to our CTO position because he knows how to do engineering. Chris has been working and running labs for quite some time. So because he's had quite a bit of postdoc experience. So when it came to R&D, research and development, and running that side of our company, he was the clear fit for that. And so I just took everything else, and we, at the very start, we wore all of the hats. Maybe not so much the engineering hat on my side, but we wore all of each other's hats for different projects. And it hasn't, until recently, it's really started getting divided into, there's an engineering team, there's a lab team, there's like a business development, financing side of the company now.
It sounds like the very natural progression. In the beginning, you do everything as co-founders. Just whatever you have to get done, you get it done.
Exactly.
So let's also talk about your problem that you're tackling with DePoly. When we did the research, we learned that only 9% of the plastics that actually could be recycled actually get recycled. So what is the problem with plastic recycling today?
In the recycling world, there's like clean plastic, which is the stuff that we're used to recycling. So it's like the bottles, maybe some trays. In some cases, you can do like 100% polyester. It's the very clean, easy to segregate sort of plastics. So this can all be recycled with mechanical recycling, and it's done quite well. But everything outside the carpets, drapes, dirty stuff, the stuff mechanical recyclers reject because it was a clean bottle, but then you put paint in it so that your kids could finger paint, right? This all gets rejected and ends up either in landfill or incineration centers. And it's a lot of plastic. I mean, 90% of the stuff that we're using on a day-to-day basis is just getting burned. So this is where we come in, and we decided we wanted to tackle that 90% because if we're going to try and clean up the oceans, if we're going to try and clean up the environment, if we're going to take our reliance off of oil, then that 90% is really the problem source of a lot of the stuff that's happening on the climate side.
Absolutely. And it sounds like a very obvious question or answer from your side, I guess, but why is incineration or landfill not a good solution?
So incineration is basically, so all plastic is more or less made from oil. Maybe the bio stuff typically doesn't come from oil. We would hope not if it's bio-based. But the majority of our plastics are oil-based. So in the end, it's just burning oil with a lot of extra steps in between. Which is really not good. You have to scrub any of the gas to make sure there's no CO2 coming out. There's NOx and SOx and other sort of stuff that could also leach depending on how good the incinerator is. Switzerland's really good. I think they all upgraded recently. So they're high-end incinerators in Switzerland. But in other areas of the world that are maybe poorer, that don't have the same regulations, you get a lot more chemicals and like chemical gases dumped into the atmosphere. So this is kind of the main issue on the incinerator side. Landfilling is good from a CO2 aspect because you just dump it into the environment, but then you get microplastics, and then that comes into our food systems. It leaches into our soils, into our waterways, and then we eat it. And now there's studies that have been coming out for quite some time now on microplastics in newborns, in humans. It's crossing blood-brain barriers, which is really scary. And so it's not you don't see it right away like you see with incineration. You see a smokestack and they're going to be burning something. But a landfill is like, oh, okay, it's just buried. And then all of a sudden you've got, microplastics coming up with your food because it was turned into a field at some point or something grew on it and people ate it
Right. You just opened the door to a whole nother problem with the landfill area.
Exactly.
Of course, now we're curious that the 90% that you mentioned, how has DePoly cracked the code here to really help to recycle them better so they don't end up in a landfill or in incineration?
Yeah, so what we've done is we've invented a process that's, it doesn't require heat and it doesn't require pressure. So you can, over COVID, when we were scaling and ramping, I actually did a lot of this stuff in my kitchen. It's really easy. It's a really straightforward chemical experiment that you can do. So no heat, no pressure is really good for CapEx, OpEx. So it's cheaper to scale. It's easier to scale. That's one aspect, but the reaction is super robust. So it doesn't matter how dirty it is. It doesn't matter if it's 1% PET and 99%, dyes or resins or foodstuffs or other polymers like nylon or spandex or PVC. None of this interacts with the reaction. So we can actually do full chemical recycling of anything that's polyester based, or actually ester polymer based. So like PET, PLA, polyurethane, etc. So we can do this, and that's that. It's not all of the 90%, but it's some of the 90%. Our goal in the future will be to do the exact same thing we're doing now for PET, but for all of the 90%.
Wow, that sounds like a really groundbreaking new technology that you developed right there.
Thank you. Yeah, it was fun. It was Chris and I did a lot of the chemistry at the very start. It took us hundreds of reactions, but it only took us 6 months to get the basis of the chemistry down.
Wow. And what I understood from you, this will also make things much cheaper, because many things are labeled as recyclable, but then because it's too expensive to actually recycle them, they just don't get recycled. So with your process, it sounds like you're also addressing that issue, that hopefully more recyclable materials actually getting recycled.
Yeah, exactly. And our goal also is the products that come out of our process, we want them to be as close to market price as possible, because really we believe that sustainability shouldn't have a price tag. It should be a no-brainer. You choose it because it's the exact same thing as what you could get from oil, but just green.
Absolutely. Yeah, fully agree with that statement. So how does your business model look like then? Do you sell the recycled material? Do you sell your technology? How does your business model work?
So there's two sides of our value chain. There's B2B companies. This could be, for example, people like BASF. It could be chemical companies, Shell, everybody else that deals with the chemicals that we produce. We can sell the chemicals either directly to these B2B companies, or we can license the technology to them because they have the core competencies to run a plant. They know the engineering behind it, everything else. So there's that side of our value chain. But then there's companies like like fast fashion brands, like your big bottle beverage guys, yogurt containers, people who produce all the fabrics and fibers, shoes, jackets, hoodies, whatever else. They're on the B2C side. And they wouldn't build a chemical plant because they're not interested in running a chemical plant. It's not their competency. So we would do like a JDV or partnership with them. Either we would connect the whole thing together, like we would line up somebody from the B2B and B2C and make a fully circular system, or we can do like a plant specifically for one company that we do circular products for their item, and then we can turn it back into PET if they require. So we're quite flexible, but typically it's licensing or it's like partnerships or collaborations.
Yeah, because otherwise I assume you would need an immense amount of money to set up and actually run the plant, right?
Yeah, it's a CapEx heavy industry.
Absolutely. And who are your typical customers? You mentioned a few like Shell, etc., but who is your typical customer, if that even exists?
Yeah, really, it's kind of everybody on the B2C and B2B side. So we do work with the companies that produce PET. We do make the same chemicals that they make. So we've sold them back kind of smaller samples because it's not large, it's not ton yet. When we get there, yeah. But we've sold them back some stuff there to do internal testing. And then we've looped that into doing full projects to make, for example, capsule-based items that should be on the market within the next kind of year and a half. And this is with B2C companies. So it really depends. Some companies also, they just want to recycle product. And this is more post-industrial. So like ribbons that people put barcodes on, for example. There's an ink that's used for that on a PET ribbon. We can work with them, for example, and just recycle the product. And they're not interested in potentially getting it back, but they just don't want to have it on their site and they want to get rid of it sustainably. So we can also just take it from them. So it really depends is the short
You're
answer.
Flexible. Absolutely. You're flexible in that regard. One thing I really like to talk to you about is how you went from the technology. You saw, hey, here's a new technology or a new combination of chemistry that actually then becomes technology, so to speak. How you managed from the first discovery to actually then create and build a sellable solution for your customers. How do you manage that process? Because many deep tech driven startups, they struggle with that. That's an immense first challenge that you have to overcome before even really starting your company.
Yeah. And I mean, it's really, especially for chemistry, you can't just go from like 0 to 100. You have to scale up in steps. So we started in a lab. The first steps that we did were all very simple lab scale. So we went from 400 milligrams to 1 gram to a kilogram, and we could do that all on a bench. Once we got all the engineering parameters ready that we needed for scaling, we built our first, it was a 25 kilogram batch reactor that we built over COVID, which Bardia did all the engineering for that side. We worked with an engineering company to help us, but he designed the plant more or less with him and Mohammed from like scratch, more or less, which is really great, and operated it and taught and trained everybody. So it took us probably about from when we were officially founded in 2020 to having this plant up and running, it was about 1.5 years, including ordering the parts, having the installation, getting trained, doing the commissioning, etc. And then after that, we spent about 1 year doing just tests. So we had to make sure, were the conditions the same? What was the temperature profile of the reaction? What was the viscosity of the reaction? We had to get, if it was a parameter, we had to have it, because you have to have that going to the next step now. When we built, that was our second scale. We got to the third scale. We built a semi-continuous plant with a different type of reactor. So we took all those parameters and we put it into the new reactor design. Did the exact same thing again. Did the viscosity change? Was the agitation right? Did we need to tweak anything? And now we're taking those parameters and we're doing the exact same thing for our 500 ton per year showcase plant. So it's a lot of steps, like baby steps almost. It's a lot of double checking. It's a lot of if a parameter isn't right, why isn't it right? Did something change? Do we need to optimize something? Do we need to buy new equipment because that now something's changed? And really, you have to take it step by step. It's the best way, and it's also the safest way to do it.
Absolutely. That makes a ton of sense. And I wonder, at what point did you then actually decide to start and to found the company along that process? Was it quite early on where you see, hey, there was potential, so let's start a company, let's take that to the next level? Or was it somewhere along that process where you said, okay, now we're confident enough and we also have a scale that is promising enough, let's say like that, to actually start a company and focus more time on that? Where do you take the boundary between research and then going into your own company and actually founding the company?
So as soon as the reaction worked, as soon as Chris and I found parameters that made sense, we showed Bardia basically to make sure it could even be scaled, because he was the one that had the best idea on if it would be possible. And he had said, yeah, it's good to go. And then at that point we decided, okay, we're going to do a startup. We started applying to competitions, because Switzerland's really rich in competitions and accelerator programs. So you can also test your company before you even actually found it, like you form in our case, an SA. So we did all that before, and then we really waited to the last minute to officially get ourselves a proper formed company, into the register de commerce. Also, I mean, if the later you wait, the less you don't have to do taxes, for example, when it's just you trying to found a company, for example. We use that to do non-dilutive funding, get the company structure, make sure it was the right thing that all three of us wanted to do, to put our time and effort and love into, for example. Yeah.
What competitions helped you the most to really get things started and get things kicked off?
So there's two. One was venture. It's the big national kind of one that it's all Swiss companies, like startups, can apply to, and then there's a grand prize. So we won that the year that we entered, and that was a really, really big boost for us. After we had, like the day after it reached LinkedIn, I had people from blue chip brands reaching out, because that's how big the kind of competition is, to say, hey, we'd be interested to talk, to see where you guys are. Maybe we can do a project. And the other one was Venture Kick, actually. We did Venture Kick also very early on. The first round we did, I guess, phase one, we used to try build a website so that we could, get our name at least onto the internet. And I think by phase two, they required that you had to also be founded. You had to have the company formed. So it helped us also, it made us sort of also found a company originally, because of this, to get to the next phase. But yeah, those were the two biggest ones. I mean, we've also done a lot of projects, for example, through the InnoBooster program, through the SNFS, through EPFL when we first started. There was InnoBooster and InnoGrant through EPFL. They helped more on like the PhD, like you still had to be at EPFL in the lab and things like this. But it also gave us time to still have access to a lab. Because once you leave EPFL, labs are really expensive. And if you don't have the money, it's really hard. You can't just build a laboratory in your garage, for example, or in your cellar. I don't think the Gironces would appreciate that. So, the big competitions were Venture and Venture Kick, and then the grant situation through EPFL, through the Swiss National Science Foundation also helped.
Amazing. Thank you for this great overview. I think that's super helpful. You mentioned before that you also, sort of license out your technology. When you give it to a big company, a big brand, and then they work with your technology, you also want to make sure that you can protect yourself a bit. So what sort of protection do you have in place that you can make sure, hey, we're okay, you using our technology, and at the same time, we also ensure that you don't steal it from us and just replicate what we have built and developed over the past years?
Yeah. So we're preparing for this basically, and it's patents is one of the biggest things. You want to make sure you have a strong enough patent portfolio so that they can't box you in first off, like they can't find a better process than yours and then patent it and then you can't go anywhere, or patent the next thing that you would need to do. So you can't even scale the technology. So it's patents is our main thing. And then it's always good to have also a good IP lawyer helping you. Lawyers in general are very good when you ask them for help in regards to these sort of things for contracts and project planning. So yeah, you do have to make sure that you're absolutely prepared. And you can try and at least before people see the technology, before they get their hands on the whole process, you can also make sure that they're trustworthy, for example. And I think sometimes you can see which companies are trustworthy when it comes to supporting startups versus others who maybe have not as great of a background for that.
How do you realize that? Because that sounds easy in theory, but probably in practice, it's not that simple.
I would talk to, in this case, people within your network. Just because a lot of times there's a lot of people that have a lot of really good insight because they've been there, they've seen it happen. Either they were in the company or they were part of a startup and they've seen the interaction between the two. And then also sometimes it's if you're going through a process and it just doesn't feel right, the contract isn't reading right, you can see that there's maybe another agenda that you don't like, you can also always back out.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to do so.
Exactly. It's your baby. It's what you made. You need to protect it, right?
Exactly. You mentioned the start, right? With these non-dilutive grants and initiatives that help you to really start your company, get things off the ground. You then also raised a total of 13.3 million in funding so far. It certainly seems like there was not a big trouble for you finding funds. So why is VC money crucial to a venture like yours?
It's really important for the growth process, basically. We were really lucky to have Wingman come in for our first investment, along with others, but Wingman was the lead for this. And at that stage, when it's just three of you and you're trying to figure out how to hire people, who to hire, what would be the next steps, what does that roadmap look like? They were really great with this. Like they were able to go, okay, great, it's the three of you. that you should probably in the next year think about hiring this type of person, or no, you're a little bit too early for this. You should do something like this instead, for example. And especially when we got into our second fundraising round, so going from pre-seed to seed, there was a lot of work that the finance and legal team helped us with. For example, a really professional data room, really getting the finances, like how to make it look really great so that when you start approaching the bigger VCs, like the international ones, that you have everything in one place, they can see it, they can ask questions, you're not missing information. They can help you also present yourself better to bigger VCs because they know what VCs are looking for.
Yeah. That sounds like the perfect sparring partner along that journey from a VC perspective. So well chosen with Wingman Ventures.
Yeah, thanks.
You talk about international investors. I think that's then also probably one of the very early on challenges that you face as a Swiss startup. You have Swiss investors. It's, I would say, rather easy to get a pre-seed or seed funding together. But then once you really want to start scaling, once you really want to hit that growth pedal, you need more money, obviously. But these rounds, really the growth funding rounds, that's something that many startups in Switzerland struggle to raise. So how do you navigate that? How do you see and experience that from a first-hand founder's perspective?
For us, we found a little bit of a sweet spot between VCs that were specific to what we were doing. So, for example, there's a VC, like a general VC called Infinity Recycling that does chemical recycling. So they were like a perfect choice to come into this, and we wanted to get them on board because they knew everything about what we were doing. They had invested in companies that do pyrolysis and this sort of stuff. So we sort of targeted VCs that we knew were in our space. They knew that it was going to be CapEx intensive, and they were okay with that. And then we also actually at this stage started looking at companies that were the CVCs, so the corporate venture capitalists. And for us, this also helps because our next stage going towards commercialization is also going to be, product demonstration and understanding and learning how to now fit yourself into a market. And they can give a lot of really good insight and guidance in that aspect as well. So we tried to balance it between almost like a 50-50 split. Well, ideally as much as you could 50-50 split between generalist VCs that could help us grow the team and grow the company, but then CVCs that could also help us grow the technology, get that market entry, and then show and allow us to demonstrate to other potential customers, clients, etc. That, we're good, you should go with them. And yeah.
That sounds like a very smart setup. I wonder if the CVCs, just a random example, let's say Shell would invest in you, would he then run into problems if he tried to sell to Exxon or Chevron, for example, that they say, well, but our competitors invested here. How do you experience that? Is that a topic, or is that more of a fear that doesn't really materialize?
No, you do have to be aware of it. There's always competition when it comes to CVCs, but the good ones will say that so they have there's always board fiduciary duties that they have to do. So if there was something to come up with a competitor, they would, if there was a vote, for example, they would excuse themselves for that. So they would stick with those proper board protocols. But ideally, if you're working with a CVC, they would understand that you can't limit yourself to just one company. You could work with, for example, Pepsi and Coke, if that would ever be allowed. But yeah, so they allow you to have that flexibility. Ideally, at this stage, you wouldn't want to limit yourself to, for example, only one option, because then growing will make it a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. So the solution is basically to have multiple competitive CVCs on board to make sure that you have all the options open.
Exactly.
Amazing. Another topic I would like to talk to you about is that your team has a near 50-50 gender split. This is unfortunately something that is still relatively rare. And I just wonder, was this a concentrated effort on your part, or did it sort of happen naturally?
It happened naturally. And it's swings between, I think, 50-50, 60-40 on both sides, depending on who we're hiring, and I guess just the applicants that we get. We just look for the right candidate. It doesn't matter who you are. If you're the right fit, if you get along with the team, for us, that's exactly what we're looking for. We want to build a strong company culture. And in that case, it doesn't matter if you're whatever your gender is or however you identify as. It should just be that you are a good fit. Everybody gets along. And yeah.
Fantastic. So you sort of serve as a role model by accident.
Maybe it's just Our lab group back at EPFL was also almost 50-50 split. And I don't know if it was just seeing that dynamic, and everybody was a good candidate. There wasn't one person that was a better candidate than somebody else. Everybody that came in was really talented. So I tried to take that as a learning, and yeah.
That seems to be the best perspective. Absolutely. So if you look into the future, your investors are confident in your plans and you have ambitious plans. What do those plans look like for the next couple of years, and what are sort of the next milestones that you want to tackle?
Yeah, so we're building a showcase plant. It's a 500 ton per year plant in Basel. This will be like the blueprint for all of our commercial plants. So this is a really big milestone for us. It'll also be it'll be a first of its kind plant on a small scale. And yeah, so we're really excited to build that and then to really showcase it to the world, what we can do, what it can do, before we start really doing expansion. And then I assume, because all startups do this, there'll be another fundraising round that will come at least in the next year and a half, where we'll start. It might not be a traditional Series A. It might be something more that's joint between us and another company to build a commercial plant. But let's see what happens. Everything's up in the air when it comes to fundraising rounds.
That's right, especially in these times where it's a bit more uncertain than it has been in the past.
Yeah, exactly.
And since you have investors on board, what is sort of your long-term vision? Do you plan to do eventually an IPO with your company, or do you plan to get acquired at one point by one of the bigger players that might already be invested in you through their CVC arm?
My goal is that we are the company that takes over other companies.
I love that. That's the ambition. Amazing.
Yeah.
I love that. I think I haven't heard that often on the podcast. So that's a very refreshing take.
Yeah, no, I really want us to be like it. Yeah, I want us to have like that brand name that, we are the company that does it. So I don't know if I can ever say if we will. I guess we'll IPO at some point because that's a standard thing. But we were going to be the company that takes over other companies.
Amazing. I love that ambition. And what about you, Sam? What is next for you as an individual, despite, of course, running and scaling DePoly?
Well, everything to do here. So running and scaling is my next big step. It's also learning to become obviously a better CEO, adjust as the company adjusts, because also one thing that we believe is as the company grows and all the rest of the team grow, that we as co-founders and management also have to grow as well and be able to change and adapt to new environments, to new phases and lives that this company takes on. So that's my goal, is to be more adaptive, to really get into my position. If it's on a personal side, I have some climbing goals and some running goals and this sort of stuff that I have, but it's maybe for a separate podcast. Perfect.
And to wrap up the episode today, we also prepared some rapid fire questions for you. I'm just gonna fire right away. Researcher or entrepreneur?
Researcherpreneur? What's the middle ground?
That sounds like the perfect combination. You live and breathe it. Are you more of an early bird or a night owl?
Oh, night owl for sure.
Yeah. What's your biggest ecological sin?
I still have to take a plane to Canada every once in a while. So it's probably plane travel. And also if we go visit people for the company in Asia, you can't take a train. Do still have to fly, and flying is still not super great.
Absolutely. Mountains or lakes?
Ooh, that's really hard. Both?
Both, yeah, sure.
A mountain with a lake on top?
Yeah, that's the perfect combination, I guess. Absolutely. And what gives you hope about the climate crisis?
I think there's such a big push right now of changing our ways. It's amazing to see just in the last 3-4 years, the changes that people are willing to make to have greener products, cleaner waste coming out of manufacturing processes. This really gives me hope that that if we all keep up with this trend, if we all keep pushing, that we hopefully ideally hit the climate targets that we've aimed for.
Right. And the last one for you, Canada or Switzerland?
I love Canada. My family's there, but I'd have to say Switzerland.
It has become home now.
It has. I've been here for almost 10 years. So it's it's a little bit on the home side now.
Amazing. Sam, thank you so much for these interesting lessons, learnings, and stories that you shared with us today. We wish you all the best, lots of success, and it's fantastic to follow your journey and to see what you're building. All the best.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, you can support us by rating our show on Apple Podcasts. This way, we can reach an ever-growing number of aspiring entrepreneurs.